There are moments when your own family can make you question everything you know about yourself. Mine came on a rainy Tuesday morning, inside a crowded county courthouse, with polished wooden benches packed full of relatives who had already decided I was the villain. Before anyone testified, my father rose from his chair, pointed straight at me, and shouted, "She's an addict! She can't be trusted with a single dollar!" His voice bounced off the courtroom walls, drawing every pair of eyes toward me. My aunt folded her arms with a smug smile. My older brother looked relieved, as if someone had finally said what he believed all along. Even my father's attorney wore the confident expression of a man expecting an easy victory. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat quietly beside my lawyer, keeping my hands folded in my lap, because I knew something they didn't. My name is Emma Carter, and I was 32 years old when I finally accepted a painful truth. The hardest people to convince are often the ones who watched you at your lowest. Nearly 11 years earlier, my life had fallen apart. Within 6 months, I lost my closest friend in a highway accident, watched my engagement collapse, and spiraled into depression. I withdrew from everyone who cared about me, made reckless choices, and spent months trying to escape grief instead of facing it. Eventually, I admitted I needed help. Therapy wasn't easy. Recovery wasn't quick. But little by little, I rebuilt my life. Most people called it growth. My father called it proof that I would never change. To him, every mistake I made at 21 became permanent evidence of who I was forever. Meanwhile, my older brother, Ryan Carter, lived under a completely different set of rules. Ryan owned a successful construction company. He lived in a beautiful suburban home with his wife and children. At every family gathering, Dad proudly listed Ryan's newest accomplishments as though introducing a celebrity. When someone asked about me, the atmosphere always shifted. Dad would sigh dramatically. "Stemma's trying to get her life together." After hearing that sentence for years, I stopped correcting anyone. The truth was impossible to explain without violating the privacy of the people I served. After earning new qualifications, I built a career helping individuals recover from addiction, trauma, and life-changing mistakes. My work partnered with rehabilitation centers, counseling professionals, and court-supported recovery programs. Confidentiality was part of the job. Because I couldn't discuss clients or sensitive cases, my answers stayed vague. To my father, vague meant suspicious. He never asked questions. He simply created his own answers, and eventually convinced the entire family they were true. Everything changed after my grandfather's family trust became the center of a legal dispute. My father immediately argued that I should have no authority over any portion of it. Then, just days before the hearing, he told everyone exactly why. "Emma's an addict." I looked across the courtroom and saw the judge quietly remove his glasses before speaking. "Mr. Carter," he said evenly, "before we continue, I have one question." The courtroom fell into complete silence. My father remained standing, breathing heavily after his accusation. For a brief moment, no one moved. Even the court reporter paused, waiting for the judge to respond. Judge Harold Bennett folded his glasses and placed them neatly on the bench. "Mr. Carter," he said calmly, "please take your seat." Dad obeyed. Though the anger on his face hadn't faded, the judge glanced toward him again. "You've accused your daughter of being an addict. That's a serious statement. Tell this court exactly what evidence you have. Dad straightened in his chair, sounding more confident than ever. Everyone in this family knows what happened, he declared. She spent years making terrible decisions. She disappeared from family events. She couldn't keep relationships together. She needed therapy. She was unstable. My attorney, Sophia Grant, leaned toward me without taking her eyes off the judge. "Don't interrupt," she whispered. "Let him finish." So I stayed silent. For nearly 15 minutes, my father replayed every painful chapter of my early 20s. He spoke about the months after my best friend's death as though grief were a crime. He mentioned my broken engagement. He described my depression as permanent instability. Every difficult season of my life became another reason, in his mind, that I should never be trusted with responsibility. When he finally stopped speaking, he looked almost victorious. Judge Bennett opened the case file and quietly flipped through several pages. Then he asked, "How old are these events?" Dad frowned. "What do you mean, the incidents you've described?" He hesitated. 10, maybe 11 years. And since then?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "People don't really change." The judge made a short note. Across the room, I noticed Ryan avoiding my eyes. My mother sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly together. Then the judge looked directly at my father. "Mr. Carter, what does your daughter do for a living?" The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. I'm not exactly sure." "You don't know?" Dad cleared his throat. "She says she works with counseling or rehabilitation, something like that." "Something like that?" "I've never really asked." The judge slowly turned toward me. "Ms. Carter, would you please stand?" I rose from my chair. "Please explain your occupation." "Yes, Your Honor." I took a slow breath before answering. "For the last 8 years, I've served as a licensed recovery program coordinator. I work alongside counselors, treatment specialists, rehabilitation centers, and court-supervised recovery programs. My job is helping individuals rebuild their lives after addiction, trauma, or major personal setbacks." A murmur spread across the courtroom. Several relatives exchanged confused looks. Judge Bennett nodded once. "And how long have you been employed in this field?" "Almost 8 years." My attorney stood, carrying a thick folder toward the clerk. "Your Honor," Sophia said, "the defense would like to submit Ms. Carter's professional records, certifications, employment history, and letters of commendation into evidence." The judge accepted the file, opened the first page, and his expression immediately changed. Judge Harold Bennett adjusted the stack of documents in front of him, taking his time as he examined each page. The confidence that had filled my father's side of the courtroom slowly began to disappear. My attorney, Sophia Grant, remained perfectly calm. She had expected this moment. The judge reviewed my employment history first. 8 consecutive years with the same recovery services organization. Next came my state licenses and professional certifications. Then annual evaluations describing my work ethic, integrity, and leadership. After that were letters from judges, counselors, and rehabilitation directors praising my ability to help people rebuild their lives. The courtroom was so quiet that the turning of each page sounded loud. Judge Bennett finally looked up. "Ms. Carter, these records indicate You've supervised court-referred recovery programs and coordinated treatment plans for hundreds of individuals. Yes, Your Honor. They also show you've received multiple awards for excellence in rehabilitation services. That's correct. He nodded thoughtfully before turning toward my father. Mr. Carter, were you aware of any of this? Dad stared blankly at the paperwork. No. Were you aware your daughter has passed every background investigation required for her position? No. Did you know she works directly with people recovering from addiction and helps monitor their progress under strict professional standards? Again, Dad shook his head. I didn't. Judge Bennett folded his hands. So you accused her of suffering from the very condition she's spent years helping others overcome. My father's face drained of color. His attorney slowly closed his notebook and whispered something in his ear. Whatever advice he offered came too late. The judge continued. The court deals in evidence, Mr. Carter, not assumptions. Everything you've presented today relates to events more than a decade old. Every piece of current evidence points in the opposite direction. Dad lowered his eyes. For the first time in my life, he had no answer. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan slowly stood from his chair. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. Ryan swallowed hard before facing the courtroom. I need to correct something. Everyone watched him. 3 years ago, my company was on the edge of bankruptcy. We were behind on payroll, and I thought I was going to lose everything. He paused. I never told my family because I was embarrassed. The room remained silent. Someone anonymously transferred enough money to keep the business alive. My heart skipped. I only learned last week who did it. Ryan turned toward me. It was Emma. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. He wasn't finished. When my daughter was diagnosed with a learning disability, Emma quietly paid for months of specialized tutoring. My mother covered her mouth. And after Mom's knee replacement surgery, Emma rearranged her work schedule to care for her every evening. Tears filled my mother's eyes. I let Dad believe the worst about my sister, Ryan said quietly. I knew the truth. And I stayed silent. The courtroom fell completely still. Every pair of eyes turned toward my father. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked like a man realizing he had spent years judging someone he had never truly bothered to know. No one spoke for several long seconds. Judge Harold Bennett let the silence settle over the courtroom before closing the case file. He looked first at Ryan, then at my father, and finally at me. This court has heard a great deal today, he said evenly. Some of it was based on evidence. Much of it was based on assumptions that should never have found their way into a courtroom. He turned toward my father. Mr. Carter, your daughter's past is not on trial. The matter before this court concerns the management of a family trust. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that Ms. Carter has spent more than a decade living responsibly, maintaining professional integrity, and earning the confidence of employers, colleagues, and the courts she serves. My father stared at the table. The judge continued. Personal growth is not erased by old mistakes. In fact, our legal system depends on the belief that people can rebuild their lives. Your daughter has done exactly that. The words hung in the air. After reviewing the remaining financial records, Judge Bennett announced his decision. The trust would continue under independent oversight with all qualified beneficiaries, including me, retaining equal rights under my grandfather's original instructions. No one would be excluded because of unsupported accusations. His gavel struck once. This matter is concluded. As people began filing out of the courtroom, the atmosphere felt completely different from when we had entered. My relatives avoided whispering. A few offered awkward smiles. Others simply lowered their eyes. Ashamed of how easily they had accepted one version of my story without ever asking for mine, Sophia packed her files and smiled. "You never tried to embarrass anyone today," she said. "You just let the truth do its job." I thanked her before gathering my own things. As I reached the courtroom doors, I heard footsteps behind me. "Emma," I turned. My father stood alone in the aisle. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. "I owe you an apology." I waited quietly. He took a slow breath. "I kept judging you by the worst year of your life. I never noticed the 10 good years that followed." His voice cracked. "I was so determined to be right that I stopped seeing my own daughter." Those words hit harder than I expected. Years earlier, I would have done anything to hear them. Now, I simply smiled. "I can't change the past, Dad," I said softly. "Neither can you. But we can decide what happens next." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I'm proud of the woman you've become." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped forward, and we shared the first genuine hug we'd had in years. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't rewrite history. But it was a beginning. Months later, family dinners felt different. Conversations replaced assumptions. Respect slowly took the place of judgment. Looking back, I realized the courtroom hadn't changed my life because I won a legal dispute. It changed my life because I finally understood that the strongest response to being misunderstood isn't endless self-defense. It's living with integrity until the truth no longer needs anyone to speak for it.